So this is a question for all our TBC peeps. I've been wondering how you feel about biodiesel because I myself do not know what it is, enough about it. What do you know about biodiesel? How do you feel about it?
It's a whole lot more than a question. So depending on what state you're in, right? So biodiesel, yeah, it's a whole lot more than a question. So bio is from plant-based, right? So if you're in Texas, which is where we're based at, you're going to find either 5 or 20% biodiesel mixed in with fuel, with your typical diesel fuel. Your number 2 diesel fuel is not what used to be 10, 15 years ago, because now it's ultra low sulfur diesel. Anybody that doesn't know what sulfur is a lubricant, and also, wow, this is such a complicated question. I cannot believe you threw this to me.
Well, I know nothing about it, so I'm curious.
Okay, so sulfur, when you're dealing with gasoline, you have octane, right? And so octane helps the gasoline to fire at a lower temperature. When you're dealing with diesel, you're dealing with cetane. Cetane helps the diesel to fire at a hotter temperature or a higher compression, because there's no spark in a diesel engine. You ever want to trick a rookie? Ask him to go check the spark plugs on a diesel engine.
Stop.
It's one of my favorite things to do. It's
Stop.
hilarious. No, they will. They'll look
Yeah, it'll
all
be
over.
fun, yeah,
No,
but
it's hilarious.
I know that even.
Right. So diesel engines run on compression, not spark, like gas motors. So cetane, right? So now when you're dealing with biodiesel, you are affecting the cetane or the heat, because plant material is obviously going to burn at a lower compression than sulfur will, because sulfur is a hard material, not a soft material like plants. So dealing with low sulfur diesel and biodiesel mixed in, whether it's 5 or 20%, obviously you want to purchase the lowest biodiesel percentage that you can get. When you get into like Kansas, Virginia, like if you fuel up in Virginia, anytime you're passing up 81 or whether you're coming up 77, it doesn't matter. Fuel up, because in Virginia, from my experience, you are going to get the absolute most BTUs per gallon of that diesel as possible, because they're just using number 2 diesel straight.
So that's good.
That's good. You want to find that. Unfortunately, in Texas, by law, the only thing you can get is either 5 or 20% mix. So biofuels, while they have their importance in the environment, because yes, you can use them from corn after it's milled and after it's used for different types of feed and, you know, grains and things of that nature, it just doesn't have the push power or the BTUs. And so technically, when you're drilling something out of the ground, because diesel inherently, that's the top of the barrel when you're dealing with diesel. That you got diesel, you got kerosene, you got jet fuel, and then you start getting into your grades of gasoline. You know, you're 94, you're 98, you're 94, you're 93, you're 84, 87, 84, and then you start getting down into your lower fuels. So, you know, diesel, the only reason they charge what they do for diesel is because it's in such a high demand. But when it comes to biofuels, you can mix that in. It's a cost-saving measure for the people that are producing it.
Okay, I have 2 things after that. So the reason why I know not only Joshua's experience, but he used to be a gas hauler.
Yep.
So he has that experience. I have a question though. When you had some gunk build up and whatever from whatever stop, what was in that fuel that was bad?
Yeah, so where you get your biodiesel or your diesel will also affect that. So when you're hauling fuel, right? You're hauling it with diesel. You're talking 7.3 pounds per gallon, and when they produce this stuff down on the Texas coast, which is where most of it's produced, down on the Gulf Coast, the further it travels up the pipeline, the more sediment settles out of the fuel. Well, I'm loading pretty close to the coast, and I'm buying fuel pretty close to the coast. So where you're buying that diesel and where it comes from, because the crude matters, right? So down in Texas, and they do it in North Dakota and Virginia, the fracking, it's going to carry all of that sediment along with the diesel. And so I've noticed a huge difference from fueling in Kansas or Oklahoma versus fueling in San Antonio, Brownsville, McAllen, Houston. You're going to get a larger amount of sediment, which your filters are obviously going to have a shorter lifespan because you're gaining more junk in your fuel because it has less time to settle out as it travels distances, whether it's in a tanker or in a pipeline. So you really need to pay attention, especially if you're fueling closer to refinement areas. Pay attention to fuel filters. Watch them. Watch your fuel mileage, because that's going to tell you, if you fuel up and you're getting 6.2 or 5.8 per gallon on the average, which that's something that as an owner operator you should be doing per tank. You should be looking at what you're getting, and you start to see that drop, even by 0.5, heaven forbid 1%, you should see that drop. You need to see where you've been fueling, change your fuel filters more regularly, because fuel filters are a whole lot cheaper than burning up an injector or, worse, just being left on the side of the road because you weren't smart or diligent enough to, maintain your fuel system.
So how did you notice that? Because I know you specified it to a certain station, but how did you notice something was wrong with the fuel you were getting, even though you were saving?
So I think I know exactly what coming out of El Paso, we have a magnificent partnership with RTS, and it's something that you can only get through us. The fuel savings and the factoring savings that you'll get through TBC consultants. But I stopped just outside El Paso because fuel was like 32 cents cheaper than in El Paso. But the fuel coming out of the end of that nozzle, it was like brown. I'm talking like chicken gravy brown. And so, obviously that alerts me to something. You got to look at the fuel color, because obviously if it's other than clearish blue or light green, you're dealing with something, whether it's algae buildup, whether it's water sediment. So you got problems. And so that's when I noticed that particular time for sure.
But isn't the cost savings worth the gunk?
Not all the time. Unfortunately, we live in a world that the dollar will speak its power. And so when you have companies such as, Pilot Flying J, I know there's a corporation that owns it, but I'm not getting into that. They're going to do their best to buy the best fuel, to, supply what they need to their customers, and then it goes down the chain after that. So not all the time, especially if you're out in an area, if you're running from Nevada to Oregon on the back roads, you just pay for the best fuel you can get to get you where you got to be. It's all a measure of risk and retainment, basically.
Good. So what would you say were 2 takeaways about biodiesel? Because I have no idea what it is. What would you say the 2 takeaways would be on biodiesel?
If you're running the newer motors, if you're running your DD platforms, your Cummins platforms, the X models, if you're running an 871, that's different. You're closer to the 12.7, the 14 liter. You're closer to the old diesel models. But if you're running that X model, you're running the DD models, you're running the PACCAR models. Volvo has theirs. Basically, Volvo's, that's a Detroit platform. They just have their upper end on the top of it. And Maxidine the same. Mack has their motor. It's the same. Volvo owns Mack. You're okay with the lower, lower diesel components and biodiesel. You're not going to get near the push out of them or the BTUs, but those engines are built to survive on that. But if you're running a cat, like a 3406 or even the older 14 or the
Not 14.7, is that anything?
no, it's
Cat and
yeah. If you're running either a 3406 or the C15, there we go, C15 motors. If you're running the N14s, if you're running the older 871 Cummins or the Detroits 14 liter 12.7s, you really need to be focusing on buying the lowest percentage of biodiesel you can get. And like I said, if you're going through those states that they have the higher number 2 diesel, especially as they treat their fuel when it comes into wintertime, man, fill up, because you're going to get the best mileage out of that fuel you can get.
Okay, next time I'll ask you about BTUs.